welcome to the third session of this Advent Your course. The overall theme is Who Am I? We're looking at what it means to be human. And the theme on this session is really to try and drill down a bit into that. What does it mean to be human? We've said in previous sessions that our theology has to be earthed. We're a material faith. How do you earth your theology, Nick?
That's a very good question, and I have difficulty answering it because an instinctive reaction is I probably don't, or I don't enough, because I read a lot, and reading is feels like a very sort of disembodied experience. You can do it in different places. It doesn't really matter the medium that you're using. It kind of feels a bit weightless, if you see what I mean. I think that's probably because I don't really come from any Christian tradition. I had no Christian upbringing at all, but the Christian tradition I found myself in one was a bit more cerebral and a bit less embodied. Now, the older I've got, the more I have become more I have appreciated the physical practices of theology.
Mhm.
But I probably don't marry the two enough, as in the physical practice of worship and reading and studying theology.
How would you describe theology? Because it sounds, I think, to many people like it's a bit abstract. It's about, thinking about things.
Yeah.
How would you describe it?
The trite way to describe it is talking about God, because
Hmm.
that's kind of what it means. But I think it might be better to say telling stories about God. We talked a bit about this in the previous session about how the scriptures, they're not a philosophical document as such. I mean, in one sense, they're not a
No,
theological document
no,
as such. They're a
no.
bunch of stories,
Yeah.
letters and laws and poems
Mm.
and so on and so forth. But in one regard, they're very embodied because obviously they were written down at some point in the past, but they're written down by people who lived at certain times amongst certain communities who'd experienced certain things and wanted to narrate certain understandings of God that had emerged through those experiences. Theology is kind of a continuation of that. It tries, in some respects, to systematize
Hmm.
and bring some order to those stories and those experiences and those beliefs. And that is necessary, but sometimes you can go too far and you end up with the kind of mere theology, which is dry, desiccated,
Hmm.
theorized, and no earthly use to any human being.
I think for me, as someone who studied theology, but studied theology wanting to be a journalist, that was my kind of ultimate
Hmm.
aim. I think for me, theology has always, um, I've always asked the question, what has this got to do with me, and what's this got to do with the world that I'm living in, and how do I communicate and package this kind of thing that can feel very cerebral or transcendent or difficult to communicate into a way that is digestible. And I get to do that a lot with the kind of writing that I do or with the job that I do. We're constantly thinking, okay, well, what does the Christian story, what does our understanding of who God is and who we are as a human beings made in the image of God have to say about this thing that is happening in the news today? So for me, that is the earthiness of theology. It can be made relevant to the things that we're experiencing on our TV screens and in our daily lives. And that to me speaks of what incarnation ultimately is. It's God stepping into the human form, but also the the human acts, and it's how we can make it accessible and understandable to us as mere human beings.
It's one of those difficult things, isn't it? That if you ask, how will the church be judged? Church with a big C will be judged. Well, maybe one answer is according to Matthew 25. Did we visit the poor? Do we look like the Jesus we read about in the Gospels? Or do we look like, do we feel like something else? Because if we do, we're a fraud.
I guess for us as British people, the church has become so much part of our kind of culture, and the grandness of it, and the ceremony, and the kind of processes and the systems that are kind of engaged with the Christian faith, that it can feel difficult to m- relate that to the Christian story that we read in the New
Mhm.
Testament in particular. Um, And you get glimpses of it with the kind of church doing really good things, setting up organizations, setting up food banks,
Mhm.
setting up homeless charities. But actually, on the kind of day to day, as well as how do we model what we believe the Christian story to be about? And I think, unfortunately, for many people, they don't see that is not the story that they hear of the church. They hear the other stories or the places in which we have failed.
Mhm.
So I think our responsibility is not just to tell the good stories, but also to embody the Christian faith ourselves.
Add an example to this. A number of years ago, BBC Radio 4 had You and Yours phone in and was talking about debt and mental health. And they had Martin Lewis, who's a money saving expert guy, giving advice. People phoning in, telling some pretty horrendous stories. And it was about the relationship between debt
Yeah.
and mental health. One woman phoned in and she said her husband had undiagnosed gambling problem and racked up £20,000 worth of debt. Couldn't cope anymore. Then answered the phone. Then opened letters. They're all debt collection. She said it's broken us and it's broken our marriage as well. What should we do? And Martin Lewis' response was very interesting. He's not a Christian at all. I think he has some sympathy with religious groups, but he's not he's not an evangelist at all. And he said, "Well, look, you need an organisation that can do two things for you. One, it can get the debts in order, so it can restructure the debts and professionally
Mm.
order your financial situation, but also an organisation that comes around, and these were his words, holds your hands, makes you a cup of tea, listens to your problems,
Mm.
because it wasn't just the fact that they had massive financial issues, it was the fact that she said her marriage was falling
Mm.
apart. Now, the organisation he was talking about was CAP, Christians
Yeah.
Against Poverty. They were doing theology there.
Yeah.
Because what they're doing is saying, well, there's a problem here.
Mm.
It's a problem of debt, but it's also a relational problem because you and your relationship with one another has been broken according to this. So we're going to do the professional stuff of restructuring the debt with you, but we're going to do the pastoral stuff of being with you, of showing compassion, of suffering alongside you, of walking alongside you. Now, that is theology, really. That is doing
Mhm.
the kind of things we do in life every day, but doing them in the way that, as it were, smells of God a bit.
Mhm. Do you think, you touched on this, I think, Chine, that Christians' failure, sometimes Christians are embarrassed about the failings of other Christians or of the church as an institution, whichever church that is, no denomination is exempt from this sort of thing. How do you respond to it if people say, well, you can write the whole thing off because you lot are a disaster?
Well, I think part of what we need to do is recognize that that is the story that people hear and that is what they understand, and to not try and explain it away, nor try to separate ourselves from the institution of the church. So, yes, yeah, the church is bad, but I'm all right. I'm a proper Christian. I'm
Mm.
really following Jesus. I think it's recognizing that in all places and all senses that we all fail, and the church as an institution is one of those things that does fail. Now, what I think is also really important is for us to move beyond those kind of headline stories. For many people living in local communities, actually, it is they have huge trust in the church that is down the road, whether
Mm.
or not they've ever been into that church. It is a sign of presence and a
Mm.
sign of a place that has open doors, that does stuff, that does God, that smells of God in their
Mm.
community. So I think often what we want to do is to draw people away from the kind of the big failures to the kind of small acts of love and kindness that they might see and experience in their own communities.
Is there any biblical narrative that you would go to in addressing that, Nick?
I mean, in
'Cause
one
I've got one.
sense, the biblical narrative is one of institutional mess up, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, one's tempted to say
Okay, well,
all of it.
yeah.
Um, I mean, I'm struck by this is not an institutional example. Barnabas and Paul
Mm.
in the New Testament Acts. Uh, Paul's not a guy you want to hang about with
No.
after what he's been doing.
No.
What are you doing, bringing this lunatic
Yeah.
into our midst? It's a risk-taking thing to do.
Yeah.
And if anybody deserves to be shown the door at this particular stage, presumably it's Paul, because he ain't been an ally. So I kind of that sort of conjures two sort of thoughts in my mind. One is with regards to institutional failures. Yeah, you accuse them. They're morally disgusting. But if you leave the story at that,
Yeah.
you find yourself in a situation which we find all too often today, which makes me equally unpalatable, which is me effectively passing judgment on a whole load of things in the world that really aren't as good as me.
Yeah.
Well, forget that, okay? Because I know how I would behave in those situations. So it's simultaneously holding this. This is morally disgusting. We have forgiveness, we have judgment, and we have second chances.
Isn't part of what it means to be human that we look at the narrative in Scripture and we see that most of the great heroes of the faith are a bit of a disaster. You know, you've got Moses at the beginning who leads the people out through the Exodus out of 400 odd years of captivity. Having made every excuse in the book, he's a murderer.
And murder, yeah, in the first
You
instance,
know,
yeah.
you go right through them. Abraham, great father of the faith, tries to flog his wife off as his sister so the local warlords can have their wicked way with her and he can save his life. 3 times, not even once. You look at Hebrews 11, the New Testament, the great roll call of the heroes of the faith, and they're all a disaster. And I think there's great comfort in this, not in that it justifies us being a disaster when we fail, but it does say this is the material God works with. To be human is to begin by recognizing mortality and our failure. Every service I go to begins, as an Anglican, begins with the question, right, who screwed up? And we all go, we have. And it's liberating.
It's probably completely inappropriate to quote in the thick of it the very blue BBC comedy about politics 10, 15 years ago. But one of the characters at one point, one of the really aggressive spads, is listening to a politician who is just complaining about how he's being treated. And the spad says, in the cleaned up version, oh, for goodness sake, stop whining. This isn't EastEnders. We're all in the same plague pit here. Well, it's kind of right. We are all in the same plague pit here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being with us for this third session. We hope you've enjoyed it, or maybe it's inspired your curiosity about the biblical narrative and what it means to be a human being, or even to be a Christian. We're going to welcome you back, I hope, to session 4, which we've titled Playing a Part, Not Playing a Part.